All right. Well, hi everyone. I forgot to start the broadcast, so hopefully you're all with us now. But I really want to thank everyone for hopping on today and joining our 5th week of the webinar series. I really appreciate everyone getting on here today. My name is Anna Kelly, and I'm an agronomist and grow coach here at EarthScout. I just want to go over a few housekeeping things. If you have any questions during this presentation, you can enter them in the chat box or the question box, and I will get to those questions at the end of the presentation. And we will be recording this webinar today, just like all the past webinars, so that you can be able to go back and watch them any other time you'd like. So if you've missed any of our past 4 weeks, you can always rewatch those webinars on our website, www.earthscout.com. So this here is a picture of our main home screen, earthscout.com. In the right top-hand corner, there'll be the word blog, and I've circled that in red here. You'll click on that word blog, and it will take you to all of our previous webinars, so you can watch them all in order or watch them one at a time. Whatever you want, you can go read some of our blogs and watch some of our webinars there. But today, like I said, we're going to be talking about a few of our case studies that are based around irrigation, soil moisture, and kind of a few strategies that people have used to monitor soil moisture with EarthScout units. So, case studies here at EarthScout, what are they? Why do we do them? They're really an important part of our research process. We use them to learn more about agronomic practices and to discover new decision points that are valuable and helpful to our growers. Our case studies are done collaboratively with growers in many different crop types and many different geographic regions of the United States, depending on what kind of data or conditions that we're wanting to learn more about or research about. Currently, our case studies are largely driven or affected by irrigation management, and this includes large acre pivot watered crops, but we have also studied ways that irrigation timing can be used to alleviate nutritional and heat-driven stress in hoop house tomatoes, and we're also working on using EarthScout data to better understand how hyper-local conditions can be used to adjust GDUs for insect and disease modeling in cannabis and many other crops as well. And we'll be looking at ways to help reduce the stressors that come into play when light and heat can't be managed directly as in indoor and hoop house grows. So that's kind of a little bit about our case studies here at EarthScout and what we've been up to. So our first irrigation case study that we're going to go over today was done with a corn grower in Minnesota who was also participating in another study with researchers from the University of Minnesota. And this study was designed to test strategies in variable rate irrigation for water conservation. And multiple EarthScout units were used to measure soil moisture as a condition for irrigation timing. So a little bit about VRI is kind of a strategy that some pivot users put into place. So it's a precision ag technology that focuses on putting the right amount of water on at the right time and at the right location. And it gives Senate pivot users the ability to change water application across the field to address any specific crops, soil types, or any other conditions that might be occurring out in the field. So there are 2 kinds of VRI systems, and the first one here on the left is based on speed control, and this concept divides the field into pie slices, and then the application rate of water is varied in each slice by changing the speed of the pivot as it moves around the field. So on the left of the speed control, we can see a map of the variability of the field, and on the right we see our pie slices, and this is where every pie slice is going to have a different speed, and the speed is going to affect how much water is being put on the field. So maybe in the red zones, we might be speeding up the pivot. We don't need to put as much water there. Maybe in the blue and green zones, we're slowing down, so we're applying more. And that's just kind of one method of doing irrigation application. And then the other method is based on nozzle control. And this is where management zones within the pivot can be any shape and any size, and the nozzles are pulsed on and off, and the pivot may speed up and slow down as well. So you'll see we have the same kind of variability map, but this time we've kind of split the field into different zones, almost like a grid. And then every zone is going to have a few nozzles. So as the pivot passes over these different grids, the nozzles on those grids are going to be putting on different rates than maybe nozzles 20 feet away. So if a nozzle is in an orange zone, and it might be putting on different amount than a nozzle further down the line in a green zone. And there are also two types of variable rate prescriptions for irrigation. The first is a static prescription, which means that the application rate stays the same or changes only a few times during the season, and it does not account for any variability over a season, such as weather events or soil moisture. The second is a dynamic prescription, which changes frequently throughout the season. Almost every irrigation pass is different, and it depends on measuring environmental variability throughout the season, including weather events and soil moisture. And then a little bit more about VRI and why growers might want to use it. So again, these brown circles are representing if we have maybe some different soil types, we're going to draw our pie slices kind of based on those soil types to capture the most of that specific area. And then each pie slice is going to have a different application of water based on those soil types. Down below those, with the circles that are overlapping, some people have multiple pivots next to each other and they might actually cross paths. So by using VRI, you can minimize the water applications in those overlapping areas so that you aren't overwatering those areas. So if we're doing a full rate on both the pivots and they overlap, those overlap areas might be getting twice the amount of water as the rest of the field. So VRI can kind of help you rein in the overwatering on those areas. And then the cluster of 4 circles or 4 pivots over here kind of give different examples of other reasons why VRI might be helpful. So circle A shows maybe a brown spot in the field or a part where there might be no crops currently growing. We don't need to water that area. Circle B shows maybe a stream or a waterway moving through the field. And again, we don't necessarily need to water those areas either. C shows maybe a scenario where we might have some surface water in the field, and maybe that's where the irrigation water is coming from. We definitely don't need to be putting water back into there with the pivot. And then circle D shows maybe a low spot or a wet spot in the field that we might want to pass over quickly or not apply as much water because water tends to sit there for long periods of time. And again, all these scenarios are just showing how VRI can help growers use their water more efficiently. And that's what this corn case study was all about. So a little bit more about the corn study. The grower's field was a 120-acre circle, and it was split into 8 zones. In every zone, there was 2 EarthScout units, and they were placed again to gather soil moisture data. 2 of those 8 zones were used as a control, and their water was applied according to the grower's traditional methods, which did not depend on the EarthScout data. So 2 zones, the EarthScout data was not taken into account when looking at watering. The remaining 6 zones were then divided so that there were 2 zones of each. So they were irrigated. 2 zones were 25%, 2 were 50%, and 2 were 75% of the amount of water that was applied to the control zone. So then our EarthScout sensors were used to monitor in real time the soil moisture levels in all of the zones. And after the few first passes of the pivot, the irrigation prescriptions for each of those non-control zones, they were adjusted based on weather and by soil moisture data collected by the EarthScout. So by using these practices and VRI, the grower was really able to save some money on energy and fuel costs of running the pivot, and it's averaged about $25 an acre. So they saved $3,000 on this 120-acre field during a test where they couldn't maximize adjustments to protect the integrity of the test. So even if the soil needed more water, they could only use so much. So even in that kind of a scenario, they were still able to save money. And we see with growers who have 2 or 3 EarthScout units per field, we see these similar savings more because of the data that we collect in more areas of the field kind of reduces the errors in our estimations for irrigation. So moving on to kind of a different crop, another case study we have done is with a grower in Minnesota who farms fruits and vegetables on land with a high sand content, and they're growing on a high sand content soil purposely so that they could intensively manage their nutrition and their water, and they even use a little bit of fertigation. Some crops they grow are melons, gourds, strawberries, watermelons, kind of those sweeter kind of fruits. And with these crops, when too much water is applied, the fruit or the vegetable, it gets too big and too bulky, and they'll lose its flavor, and then therefore become kind of a less favorable product for their consumers to buy. So they really need to balance the right amount of water for the plants at the right time to avoid this overwatering. So the first year of using EarthScout, they had 2 units placed in their field. One unit was used to monitor moisture conditions when they are watered using the same practices that they always had. And the other EarthScout was used to monitor soil moisture conditions, and they would change their watering based on the data coming from the EarthScout unit. They also had some notifications set up within the EarthScout app that would notify them every time their moisture levels fell below the parameters that they had set. So then they were able to take action in real time, either go out and turn on irrigation or to shut off the irrigation. And in their first year with EarthScout, they were able to save 50% on water and irrigation costs on their farm. And then in their second year, they purchased 3 more EarthScout units and placed them in other crops and their hoop house. And from there, they're able to dial in moisture on other crop types on their farm, as well as temperature and solar radiation in their hoop house. And in 2021, they had some of the sweetest watermelons in their history at the farm. They measured around 15 or 16 bricks, and bricks is just a measurement of like sugar of sweetness. So 15 or 16 bricks is pretty high for watermelons. So that's a very sweet watermelon, and it's something that's very sought after in their market. So they're really happy with that last year. All right, and then switching to a whole nother crop type, one last case study we're going to talk about today is in cannabis. And this case study was, we were working with a newer cannabis grower who had lost their head grower right before the summer, and that grower, they weren't an agronomist themselves, they were pretty new to all of this. So they used Grow Coach advice throughout the summer, but they really relied on the EarthScout data and the Grow Coach during the first part of transplant, when plants that were all being watered correctly continued to kind of fail. So there were some days that the plants looked like they were overwatered, even when the soil moisture and was telling us that there's not very much there. It was pretty dry. So it actually turned out that their soil had a very different composition, which prevented oxygenation of the roots until the soil was actually allowed to get near the wilting point. So they're able to figure out also that different varieties and different strains, they really like different amounts of oxygen and moisture in the root zone. So they're able to kind of manage those different strains differently. So this year, they're going to use solar radiation sensors and air temperature data, along with some other measurements outside of EarthScout, to learn more about the light and heat photosynthesis saturation points, specifically in cannabis. So there's a saturation point for all plants where the plant can no longer photosynthesize or create energy without basically causing stress or damage to the plant. And it's usually survivable by the plant, but it's definitely not the kind of state we want them to be living in, especially when you're trying to get as much yield as possible. So finding a saturation point will allow these growers to make other management decisions to help manage, any stressors and protect their yield. And one thing that they're looking at in the future is potentially shading their crops, so that we can, at the certain saturation point where the plant has taken enough, we can put a shade over the top of the plants and kind of help them from being too stressed out. So some strategies when using EarthScout. So all those case studies, there were many different strategies that people use, but these are some other strategies that other growers in EarthScout, maybe not in our case studies, are using. So when we have one EarthScout unit out in the field, that's going to be great. It's going to be better than not having an EarthScout unit out in the field. Any measured data is better than no data at all. And you can always work with your Grow Coach to kind of decide where the best place to put your EarthScout unit is, so that we're collecting the right kind of data that you're looking for. We really recommend 2 or more units in a field, and this will allow a grower to start doing more comparative work and to start kind of mapping out their fields or mapping out their variability, kind of, so to speak, within the field. So this comparative work and finding our variability work together to increase the precision of any irrigation or management adjustments, because more of the conditions or more of the variability within the field is going to be taken into account. Another thing we like to tell everyone is to take note of your installation date of when you installed the EarthScout unit, because it's really easy to forget. So if you have the EarthScout unit turned on maybe for a week before you take it out and install it in the field, it's important to know the actual day that it was placed in the field so that we can determine where the good data kind of starts at. So kind of we just want to look at from that date forward, maybe not the week where it was just sitting inside. Another thing I recommend is to take lots of notes. So we know what, field capacity and wilting points are for all soil textures, but a lot of EarthScout users are looking for precision, and the more actively that we track individual fields and their variability, we can kind of better utilize all the data coming from the EarthScout units. Some other things you might want to take note of is when did you turn on the irrigation, and what was, gallons per minute or gallons per acre, what was the speed if it was a center pivot kind of application. And also take note of the field conditions that you use to decide to turn on the irrigation. So what observations were you making out in the field that made you decide to pull the trigger on turning on water? So maybe was it, you did the hand texture by feel kind of method and you're feeling moisture of the soil, or is it, weather events that happened in the past, weather events that are happening now, or, forecasted weather events, and maybe also your crop type. So kind of take note of those different observations that you're using to decide when to turn on irrigation. And even, some people have the, I always turn it on the second week of June kind of philosophy, and that's totally fine. There's lots of people that do it that way. So in the first year of kind of using an EarthScout, we're going to kind of discuss how other conditions correlate with the measured soil moisture at the same time. So we're looking at what did we see in the field and comparing it with the EarthScout data. So it's kind of just readjusting how the grower thinks about water management when we're kind of using that technique. We also want to watch our data come in immediately after the water has been applied to see how it affects different sensors at different depths and even at different units if you have multiple units in a field. One last thing is to take pictures. So it's really easy to forget what happened in July when it's December. So pictures really help us to compare what was the field looking like on this date and at this time, and we can go back and then look at the EarthScout data from that day and that time and kind of start correlating and comparing things that way. And like I've always said, our grow coaches are always there. You can always give us a call. We really encourage, users to talk regularly and spend their time reviewing the data with a grow coach if they want to. Us grow coaches are really used to looking at this data all the time and understanding what different trends mean. And we definitely want all of our growers to understand this as well. We really want them to see it kind of how we see it. So we're always willing to teach anyone how to kind of read their data and understand it. So in summary, our case studies really help us to find more decision points for a grower. There are no set or defined ways to use an EarthScout. That's always something to remember. So definitely experiment. No one really is using EarthScout in the same ways across, the whole United States. Everyone has their reasons why. Everyone has different places or different philosophies that they're wanting to try out. So there's always a different way to do it, and we can do it however a grower wants. And 2 or more units in a field can really help to capture more variability within a field. So we always recommend, 2 units is better than 1, but even 1 is better than none at all. So with that, we've come to the end of our webinar for this week. If you want to learn more about EarthScout, or you can read about our case studies even at earthscout.com. If you have any questions you want to ask us over the phone, you can always give us a call there. On earthscout.com, we have a chat box, and you can chat with some EarthScout employees. We're real people on the chat box. You can also follow us on our social media platforms, see what we're up to. We also post these webinars later today on our social media. So you can find us on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, almost all those social media platforms out there. We are probably on, so give us a follow there. And let me check the chat or the questions and see what we have. So, one question. So, would you recommend someone using VRI to use soil moisture sensors? I definitely would, especially, you have high variability across your field, having multiple EarthScout units kind of placed in those areas. So then as those different applications amounts of water after they're applied, you can see if they reached 2 different depths, or is what you're applying actually, is that all going down deep into the soil, or is it only hitting your first sensor maybe at 4 or 6 inches and not 12 inches? So it can really help you to adjust those VRI prescriptions even more. So yeah, I definitely recommend using soil moisture sensors and VRI together. That those can be a really powerful kind of tool set to have for you. And I don't see any more questions, but I do want to announce that it's been a really exciting week at EarthScout for us in the news. We launched a new product called a soil cub. And with that release of the soil cub, we issued a press release that was picked up by local and national publications, including the Star Tribune, AP News, and Global Newswire. And we really look forward to launching more exciting developments and products to share with everyone. If you'd like more information about any of our products, like I said, you can contact us by phone or through our website for a quote. And you can also view the press release on our blog. So the same place that you'd find these webinar recordings, you can find those blogs as well. And with that, I think that's all I have for this week. So this was week 5. Next week is week 6. So it's going to be the last kind of webinar series for our spring series, and that is entitled Crazy About Cover Crops. So if you're interested about learning about cover crops and how EarthScout can kind of be used in a cover crop situation, definitely tune in next week. But with that, I think that about covers it. So I hope everyone has a great weekend, and I hope to see you next week.